Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I am your host, Scott Brady, and I'm joined today by Bruce Turner. Now, Bruce is known as Overlanding with Bruce here in South Africa, and he is an extremely interesting character that has not only his own personal businesses, but he has a passion for helping people come to South Africa and to Southern Africa and explore this incredible continent. So he uses Hiluxes to provide people with the access into the backcountry, but he also has a personal love for Land Rover. So we talk about how people can come to South Africa, they can use a Hilux to explore, how they prepare the vehicles, what to look for on a trip, some recommendations around places to go and key places to visit, kind of how Bruce sets up a trip for someone coming in to do their own self-managed, self-directed, self-navigated, self-driven drives around Southern Africa. But then we get into a really fun conversation around using modern Land Rovers for exploration in such rugged terrain, in such remote locations, because Bruce actually uses just a couple-year-old Land Rover Defender, and he's had really good success with this vehicle. So there's a lot of information out on the internet around what does a Defender work like off-road, how does it last, what the reliability is like. So we really dig into how he has modified and prepared modern Defenders for overland travel in remote locations, but also the successes and some of the challenges that he's had along the way. So please enjoy my conversation with Bruce. Well, Bruce, thank you so much for being on the podcast today with me. There's a couple things that I'm so excited to talk to you about, starting with your use of modern Defenders for long distance overland travel here in Africa. So we're going to talk about that. But then I also really want to do the deep dive onto how you work with people when they're coming to visit Africa and do their own self-drive journey around the country. But let's start off the conversation a little bit with, you mentioned that you were born in Zimbabwe. So tell me, where were you born in Zimbabwe and how did you end up in South Africa?
Okay, so I grew up back then it was called Salisbury in Zimbabwe, but now it's called Harare, just on the outskirts in a sort of very horsey area called Borodale.
Okay.
And I had a great childhood. We had, very much outdoors type of upbringing there. I was on farms most of the time. And unfortunately, my parents got divorced. So my mother came to South Africa, my father stayed behind, and I actually came with my mother.
Yeah, sure.
When I was very young. I was probably about 12, 13 years old.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That would be quite a change, wouldn't it, to go from being in the wilds to in such a big city?
Absolutely. South Africa was always this massive metropolitan city for us guys growing up in Harare. So it was quite a big change to come to school here. In Harare, I was at an all-boys private school. In South Africa, I was at a male-female school. What do you call it? Dual medium school?
Co-ed, yeah.
Co-ed school, yeah. So that was a big change.
Sure.
Now I had all these ladies around me, and I didn't know how to talk to ladies,
Trial by fire, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So.
Oh, that's incredible. So when you look back at your time in Zimbabwe, what were a couple of high points? What were a couple memories that you had that really sparked your passion for the outdoors?
I think where we specifically, we were just outside of Harare, and we had a small holding there that was not deep in the bush, but it was enough in the bush that it made it feel like a real bush. And we had horses and all that sort of thing. And I used to spend a lot of my time just exploring because TV only started at, I think, 5:30 in those days, and before that was just a test pattern. Black and
wouldn't
white.
the world be better off if that was the case? None of the social media apps worked until 5 p.m. Think of all the kids. They'd be outside, they'd be in the pool.
Yeah, absolutely.
They'd be running around in the bush.
So I had to swim, ride my BMX, or be in the bush, and most of the time I included all three in that.
Yeah, in each day.
Yeah, each day. That was my life.
Oh, but what I can see why that would be such an incredible experience growing up, and how it would just create this deep love for the outback for you.
Yeah.
So when you moved to South Africa at 12, so then did you still get the chance to go back often to Zimbabwe? Or
so I used to go every December for the Christmas holidays to visit my family, my father and his, and the rest of my family. And Harare I was very fortunate to have that because a lot of my family are very traditional. So, Christmas holidays was a big thing for the family, and everyone get together on Christmas Day for lunch and share gifts and all that sort of thing. And every Sunday as a family, we would generally do something. So we would either braai or barbecue, or we would go to the dam and go skiing with jet skis, not jet skis, speedboats and that sort of thing. Or we would just be out and about, doing something. There was this place just outside Harare called Dombashawa where we used to go and just climb rocks and swim in rock pools and things like that, So it was a very basic sort of upbringing, and I'm very fortunate to have gone through that because I think a lot of the children nowadays are missing that.
Yeah, and I know that I missed that in my own life. I have to really have a lot of discipline around not being on devices to make sure that I'm out playing on my BMX or in the pool or in the bush, right?
Absolutely.
I think we have to remember to tell ourselves to do that even at this age, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you first started traveling in the backcountry, were you traveling in a Land Rover at that time?
No. Funny enough, my first vehicle, I used to work part-time at the local store, CNA, which was they kind of sold books and stationery just to earn some extra money, and I bought my first car, which was a VW Rabbit 1.
Oh, those are cool. Those are cool.
We call them Golfs here, but it was a Rabbit in America, and it was 1100cc. It had a lot of power. Not really, but
it felt like it.
Yeah, it felt like it.
Whatever old you were.
And that was my first overland vehicle.
Oh, cool.
And my first trip in it was from Johannesburg to Harare.
Oh, wow. You drove back home with it.
Yeah.
Incredible. You got to show your dad your new car.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought I was so cool in it.
Of course. You were. Yeah, you were.
Exactly. So that was my first overland vehicle. And about 4 months after I got my license, I was visiting Harare, visiting family, and one of my dad's friends asked me to drive a Series 2 Land Rover from Harare to Beira.
Oh, wow.
Which I did. And that was quite an experience.
And what did you learn from that first four-wheel drive trip?
I was a little bit young to actually, remember everything, to be honest with you. But I remember it was just after the war in Mozambique, and we actually drove in convoy with the Zimbabwean Defence Force.
Sure.
For protection. And, at that stage, the roads were all damaged, but the bridges were still intact. So you had a 1 foot sort of climb up onto the bridges, and you couldn't do a decent speed, so you really had to go slow. But the Land Rover sort of left a mark on me because the steering wasn't great. You had to, 9 o'clock, 3 o'clock all the time just to keep it going straight. And then you'd stop every 200 kilometers to check the oil.
Yeah.
Things like that.
That's like any good relationship, and I think that's maybe why we love Land Rovers, is that it is a relationship.
Exactly.
You got to make sure you're paying attention. You got to make sure you're communicating with the vehicle, checking things out.
It's exercise while you're driving.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Oh, what an incredible journey that would be. I mean, so many of the people that I've talked to in Southern Africa, those are their first memories. Were in a Series Land Rover, and it's not too far off from me either, because when I was growing up, looking at a National Geographic or looking at the Mutual of Omaha, Wild Kingdom, or on the television or whatever, that's what you saw. You saw a Series Land Rover, stopping and taking photographs of an elephant or whatever. And for Americans, not only Southern Africa, but particularly where you live now in South Africa, it is a place that so many want to visit. And you've been sharing with me, this isn't a goal to necessarily promote your business, but the way that you describe how you work with people that are coming to South Africa. I'd like to work through that process with you on the podcast to help people think. So, think of a young couple. They're living in Seattle and Washington, and they both so desperately want to come and see Africa. This is the Garden of Eden. In my mind, there is no place else on earth like Southern Africa, despite its challenges. Because with any great or an incredible place, there's also going to be the yin and the yang. There's going to be challenges that come with it. But that's part of the reason why it's still accessible. It's still inexpensive by comparison.
Exactly.
Is because of those challenges. So a young couple, they're looking to come to Africa. and they reach out to you to say, hey, we'd like to hire a Hilux and we'd like to go see Southern Africa, what would be the first things that you'd ask them?
So what I normally do is I try and gauge what sort of experience they have. If it's their, I figure out that it's their first trip and they haven't actually, used a Hilux, slept in a rooftop tent, I try and be honest with them and sort of give them a realistic sort of vision of what it's going to be like. Because the last thing you want to do is have an unhappy person sleeping in a rooftop tent uncomfortably.
Or it could also be dangerous for them too.
It could also be dangerous. So I try and find out what sort of experience they have, and then I give them a realistic sort of picture of what to expect. And then I also try and find out what their aim is in visiting Africa. So in Johannesburg, you can go and do a lot of historical things from apartheid years, or you can go to Kruger National Park and see the bush. And then, and the wildlife and everything. You could also go to our neighboring countries quite easily, like go and see the desert in Namibia. Or you could go and see camp in the wild in Botswana or visit Zimbabwe.
It's easier to get to those countries than people realize because the roads in South Africa, for the most part, are very, very good.
Yeah.
The recent trend towards these coal trucks, I think, is going to create some issues for the country, but I'm sure they'll figure that out. They'll get more coal going by rail again, but I noticed that in the last drive. But for the most part, you're at the Namibian border in a day, you're at the Botswanan border in a day, and then you're into these completely different landscapes.
Yeah. Exactly.
And, both Namibia and Botswana are incredibly safe as well. So where, let's say that they want to go and see Botswana and they want to go see Namibia, what would you recommend that they bring with them? What should they have in their own kit that they're going to bring over?
So I pretty much arrange everything except your personal items, your food and your clothing. I mean your food and your cold drinks. But I also help with that also.
Yeah.
Because obviously they're arriving in this strange country, they don't know where to go to shop and everything.
Yeah.
So generally we would help them do their shopping also, or make recommendations.
Make sure they know what biltong is.
Yeah, make sure they know what biltong is at Boerewors.
Yeah. So good.
Yeah, exactly.
So good. And then, whoever's had beef jerky, this is like beef jerky times 10. So it's so good. So good.
So we'll help him with the whole process, because I know what it's like. I've traveled overseas and you arrive in a strange place and nothing's familiar and you don't know where to even buy coffee.
Yeah.
So I try and take that away. That there's also, because Africa can sometimes be a little bit disorganized with bookings and that sort of thing, I try and help them through that process or make recommendations. And all of this is a sort of add-on free service that I do because they're hiring my vehicle. And what I'm trying to achieve is that people build a relationship with me, and then they can actually call me if they have any questions along the trip, and then I know my vehicle's safe also.
Well, for sure. In fact, it was cool the other day, which thank you again for letting me borrow the vehicle and use it in South Africa. But just the other day, you sent me a WhatsApp and you're like, "Is everything okay?" Because the tracker switched off. So it's so cool that you have. I mean, on a Hilux in South Africa, you need to have a tracker because they're easily stolen, and they're also very desirable for someone to steal. Yeah. So another reason to drive a Land Rover.
Yeah, exactly.
But so you have a tracker on the vehicle, obviously, to prevent theft.
Yeah.
But then you are also able to keep track of where people are at, and are they okay, or have they not moved in a while? Or in my case, I believe you had it where the tracker maybe shut off.
Yeah, so in your case, what happened is that I got a notification to say that the battery power had been lost. And that's, sometimes it happens because there could be a signal issue, or the battery could be quite low, or somebody's actually disconnected the battery. So
I was under an overhang, maybe that's what it was.
Could possibly be, yeah. So it's always good to just send a little WhatsApp, say everything all right, and you kind of, then you start doubting yourself and you say, well, they can, if there's a criminal involved here, they can also answer.
Yeah.
But then you answered in a specific way that I knew it was you.
Yeah, sure.
I forget what you said, but I said, okay, no, that's definitely Scott. So, what people also need to realize, without sounding negative, there's a lot of desperate people in Southern Africa that need to feed their family, and they desperately need to get some sort of form of income, and sometimes that is criminal, unfortunately. So I try and provide a little bit of training beforehand, or a little bit of sharing a bit of knowledge, what to be careful of, and then also just keep sort of an eye on you. If that sounds a little bit weird, maybe, but just make sure you're safe.
But I think that's something that people will appreciate.
Yeah.
They're in a foreign land, and they have someone they trust you enough to hire the vehicle from you, and they know that you have an incentive to keep them safe as well. And really, in my experience, that it's good to be mindful in Johannesburg because there's more organized crime.
Yeah.
But once you get out of the big cities, then it's really just a crime of opportunity.
Yeah.
It's not like you're going to come across bandits on the highway.
No.
It's very, very rarely. I've never heard of it, but it's certainly possible. But you're usually like, you leave a camera on the passenger seat and somebody busts the window.
Yeah.
So it's a good idea to just be mindful of your personal security. Everyone that I know that lives in South Africa has a story, and so people have encountered challenges for sure. So I think it's important to be mindful. Don't drive at night.
Yeah.
Just those basic things that make a big difference.
But driving at night, there's two reasons for that. There's obviously the criminal side, that you are at risk, but there's also, there's sometimes animals on the roads and badly lit streets and that
or
sort
drunks
of
or
thing.
people
or drunks
that don't have their headlights on, or one headlight's broken out or whatever. Yeah,
exactly. So that's all sort of part of the process when I'm preparing someone for a trip, because I get a nice understanding of what they understand. I've just had 3 lovely Australian ladies that first time out of Australia, first time in Southern Africa, and they've just traveled through Botswana and Zimbabwe, and they had the most amazing trip. So I also try and mix up a little bit. The Cape in South Africa is very nice. So
beautiful.
So you go to the Cape.
Cedarburg. And unbelievable.
It's spectacular. So you go to the Cape, you can have those winelands and the Cedarburg and all that sort of thing. You can go up to Namibia, across to Botswana, into Zimbabwe, Mozambique, into Kruger National Park and back, depending on your time, obviously. And it leads to a nice sort of round trip where you don't see anything twice.
Yeah, in fact, the folks from Overland were here not that long ago, last summer, and they did a big loop like that. So for those that are listening, the Overland will be launching their Africa series, but that whole loop that they did, you could do with a higher vehicle, and the Hilux is really well suited to it. They're a little bit underpowered, which I believe brings some safety with it, so you don't tend to drive as fast. They tend to handle the load pretty well. Like this truck feels heavy. I don't know what they come in at on weight, but that canopy seems fairly heavy. And there's drawers back there and batteries and water tanks and all that other stuff. So they handle the load quite well. And then they're also fairly fuel efficient and quite capable off-road. So it's kind of a sweet spot. And then they're also not so expensive like a Land Cruiser, where you could be spending another couple $100 a day on a rental. So they're an affordable rental as well. So is that why you picked Hilux?
I picked them because, I'm a Defender person, and I love my old Defenders, but let's be honest, it's a truck. And if you're not used to driving a truck around a very hot climate and bumpy roads and that sort of thing, you don't really want to put your family through that. You'd rather than be in a sort of a more sort of comfortable vehicle. And I chose the Hiluxes because it was a good balance between performance and comfort. And you can have an air conditioner that actually works and cools down the inside of the car, and you don't have to worry about the safety of your children in the back. So the Hilux was, and it's also a very reliable vehicle.
For sure.
Things can break on it. It's not indestructible. Things do break.
What have you seen as a more common failure?
I've had some minor electrical issues, like the window not opening. I think you experienced that. I've also had the air conditioner stop working. In fact, Christmas Eve this year, I had to drive to a place called Tweerivieren, which was about 1,200 kilometers from Johannesburg, to go and swap out a vehicle because the air conditioner had stopped working. And I did that because the couple that had hired the vehicle were from the UK, and they were busy going into Namibia in the middle of summer, where they're going to sort of have temperatures of 45 degrees.
Forget it.
They were going to suffer, so I had to do that. And but that was an air compressor that just decided it had enough, And these vehicles are put through some tough conditions. They're well maintained. Toyota maintain them, like your vehicle vehicle, even though it's not due for service, when you bring it back, it will go straight to Toyota, get a full check over, full service, even though it's not due. Because I don't know what you've done with it. You may have gone through rivers, and I don't know that.
Yeah. Well, Jess drove it, so anything's possible.
Yeah. so I'm not saying it could have been abused, but
no, I'm kidding.
It could have been abused.
Yeah, sure, of course.
And so I make sure that when the vehicle goes out, it's in top condition.
You should put a G-force measuring device with your tracker, so you can know if it takes a big hit. So, I mean, there are some deep potholes on these roads for sure. But I mean, Toyotas are so well suited for that. They really are a nice confluence, like you said, of comfort, capability, capacity, performance off-road. They really are a nice combination of that. So, when you talk about a trip like that, Americans don't have a lot of time. So if this young couple says, hey, I've got 2 weeks from when they land, they're going to land in Joburg to when they got to fly back out again, what route would you typically recommend that people do over about 2 weeks?
So it all depends on the individual, to be honest with you. I can have them spend 2 weeks and only do 1,000 kilometers, or I can have them do 2 weeks and do 10,000 kilometers.
Sure.
I usually recommend to people that they don't do too much, because then you're only sort of scraping the top and you actually don't dive down deep into the areas. If you go to Okavango, you want to spend 3, 4, 5 days there minimum. But a lot of people drive through there.
It's too bad.
And
that's special.
Yeah, it's such a special place. And sometimes you need to wait for nature to come to you.
Yeah.
You can't go to nature all the time.
Yeah.
And you're driving on this little strip road in thousands of square kilometers of bush. The chances of you seeing lion, for example, is very slim. But if you camped in one place for 5 days, you've got a bigger chance of seeing more game, because they're going to walk past all things.
One of the most incredible campsites that I ever stayed at was, there's a small in-holding that's managed by the local tribe, and you can get a permit and you drive north out of Mound, several hours, and you camp right on this river. And I mean, there's elephant coming to drink. There's giraffe. We were sitting around the campfire, and I don't know what little hair I have on the back of my head stood up, and I just knew something was off. And I kicked my flashlight on, and here was a hyena coming closer to the fire. It was beyond incredible to experience. I mean, there's absolutely nothing like that. And do you recommend people go to the Rhino Reserve on the way north?
So
is that Kama? Is that what that's called?
Kama Rhino Sanctuary. It's a great stop off, because it's only about 7 hours from Johannesburg.
That's right. It's a good stop.
Yeah, and it's quite a nice experience, because I always recommend people stay there 2 nights. A lot of people stay there 1. Us locals, we generally stay there 1 night, but you miss out. You don't get to see the rhino. And from there, there's so many different routes, and it all depends on the individual. A lot of people may not even go as far as that. They may just want to go to Kruger National Park. Which is really easy.
And it is, and it's Kruger's nice because you can self-drive. They have pretty big campsites, and it's a massive park. There's a ton of wildlife in there. It's really easy to see wildlife in there, I found. But then again, the things I didn't like about it is, like in the Okavango, you shouldn't really get out and wander about, but you can at least get out of your vehicle. Like in the Kruger, they don't allow you out of the car.
No.
They don't even want you rolling your windows down.
Yeah, the thing is that there's, you're an experienced traveler, but there are a lot of people that sort of aren't used to being around wild animals, and you need to sort of protect the crowd, not
sure.
The individual. And I've seen photographs where people have got out of cars to take pictures of lions. And lions, I mean, they'll cover 5 meters in 1 second.
You don't have a chance.
You don't even have a chance.
Yeah, by the time you realize this thing's going to eat you, it's already eaten.
Yeah, it's on top of you. And it happens quickly, and a lot of people don't realize that. So you've got to sort of create these rules to protect people sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
but the Delta is, I mean, it is really like the Garden of Eden. And then from there, it would be very easy to head into the Caprivi or to go into the Kalahari or just, there's so many incredible options. What are your, outside of Zimbabwe, in the countries that we just talked about, what would be your top 3 or 4 destinations that you think people should see?
Sure. I think everybody needs to see the Mahari Pans in Botswana. You know, that's 2,000 square kilometers of nothing. It's like being on the moon. And there's Kuba Island and then Kukunya Island, which is more deserted. Kuba Island is run by the local tribe there, and you pay them for the camping and that, which is a great stopover. And it's got these big round rocks and these baobabs, and there's also a little bit of history involved there where people think that it's connected to the Great Zimbabwe ruins, because there are ruins on the Kuba Island. No one can explain it. They think that it could be, you know, initiation site, or it could be a burial site. No one actually knows. Or it could be a trading route, because you got in Mozambique you got Masikani, then you got Great Zimbabwe ruins, then you got Kubu, and you've got all these ruins on almost a straight line. And no one can really explain why.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then you got Mapangubu in the Limpopo province, you know?
Right.
So it's a really interesting place, but it's also a spectacular place. If you want to see stars and the Milky Way in that area, the air is crystal clear because it's so dry.
And there's something so neat, Bruce, about someone that lives in the northern hemisphere to look up at the southern sky. Because we don't, I mean, I'm not an astrologist. I don't know a lot about the sky, about the stars, but when I look up at the stars in the southern hemisphere, I know I'm looking at something different. It just looks different. And then you find the Southern Cross, and then you start to realize, like, this is an entirely different view.
Absolutely. And you know, at Kuba Island, you can walk out on the Pansy because there's no predators. And at night, and if you just lay on the pan on the ground and look up at the stars, you'll actually start seeing different colors in the Milky Way. You'll see the greens and the blues and the aqua kind of colors in the Milky Way once your eyes get adapted to it. And the stars, you know, a lot of people that sort of visit these places also come from cities, so they're not used to this blanket of stars. And you go out there into this pitch dark and you see this crystal clear sky with these amazing stars. It's breathtaking, even if you're not interested in astronomy, you know?
Right. I find it to be, it absolutely leaves me breathless. It's just absolutely beautiful. And there is so little light pollution in Africa. I mean, we're in Johannesburg, so you don't see many stars here, but it doesn't take that long out of the city, and there's really no light pollution at all. And you just see, you see so much. All right, so
Mahari Pans.
Mahari Pans,
If you want to, 3 places, it's a little bit unfair for Namibia and Botswana, but there's so many different places. Like you could go to the Okavango. Okavango is always spectacular whenever you go there. Then you go to southern Namibia, to all the deserts and everything there. It's beautiful there also.
What in southern Namibia, I haven't, other than just driving through on my way to the Transfrontier Park, because I'd spent a lot of time in the dunes, in the coastal dunes. So. And also there's a Tosha. I mean, what, in Namibia, what would be the couple of real...
With Namibia, I generally try not to include Namibia with a Botswana trip for a short-term 2-week trip. It's too vast. You know, if you're going from Johannesburg to Namibia and back, you must budget on 6,000 kilometers at least. Because it is so vast, and the distances you travel are hundreds of kilometers, you know. So generally a Namibia trip, I try and get people to do maybe to go to Namibia, then go back to Cape Town, and if they're going to do that over 2 weeks, I'll generally try and get them to stay in southern Namibia instead of going up north, because they're going to spend every day driving. And
it's a big country, surprisingly.
And generally, and I know certainly in my family, I love to drive. I'll drive all day, every day. You know, I love exploring and everything. But my wife and my daughters, when they were younger, they weren't on the same page as me, and they didn't really enjoy that as much, you know. So,
but it's so good to understand what their needs are too.
Absolutely. So I would say southern Namibia, pretty much anywhere. The canyons, the deserts, and everything like that. Even up to Walvis Bay, Etosha, and then you got Okavango, and then Mahari. There's also Central Kalahari. You know, and as I'm talking, I want to mention this place, but I'm saying, okay, there's only 3, but you know, there's so many of these great places.
And that's the truth of it, is that we could spend 100 lifetimes and not see it all. And we're talking about within 10,000 kilometer round trip. You couldn't see it all.
No, not a lot. And that's why I try and convince people, especially over 2 weeks, to take it easy and just like to slow down a bit. You know, I see far too many people. They're rushing from point A to point B to point C to point D, and they're actually saying, "Oh, but we didn't even see lions," but they didn't even give it a chance to see lions.
Sure.
You know. And then I know some people, they've gone up to the Okavango and they've stayed at like Third Bridge, and they've heard lions and seen lions every other day. You know, because they've actually sat and they've waited for nature to come to them. You know? Yeah.
Well, that's such great advice.
Yeah.
Any other considerations, like when someone is looking to hire a vehicle, what do you think they should be looking for in the company? What do you recommend, the Hilux only, or are there other options that you think are a good option?
There's a lot of different options. Now, what I normally do with my clients is that I try and find out their needs. Mm-hmm. If they don't drink coffee, I don't include a coffee press and a percolator because it just takes up space and weight. But in Africa, we find that a lot of people like instant coffee, but a lot of Europeans, they don't like instant coffee. So I cater for overseas people that might have a special taste in coffee. So we'll have a percolator or we'll have a coffee press and that sort of thing.
You're a wise man. A wise man.
Don't mess with people's coffee.
I'm telling you, if you can get that right, I mean, you can even screw up the booze a little bit, but man.
I mean, there's even simple things. If a family is coming in and they're coming with kids, I mean, even there's big kids that do this also, but we like to braai or barbecue marshmallows.
Sure.
I don't know if you do that in the States.
We do, absolutely.
But the problem is if you go into the desert, you don't find a stick. So I've got special little sticks that extend for the marshmallows for the kids. And, you know, the cars, if the kids are coming, then there's always a bag of marshmallows for the kids. Little things that we try and do that sort of differentiate us from other hire companies.
Yeah.
I like to consider that we're not really a hire company. We're kind of lending our cars to some friends when it comes.
It definitely seems that way, Bruce. And I guess it's important for me to acknowledge that and compliment you on it.
Thank you.
You have this business because you love it, not because you need it.
Yeah.
And that means that you have a small group of vehicles, you are very cautious who you lend them out to, and you give a lot of personal attention because you have a love for traveling in Africa. So I think that that's very honorable of you because you're helping people to have the experience of a lifetime.
Thank you.
So very cool what you're doing.
Thank you very much.
You know, and you'll probably end up with 100 Hilux, but right now you got what, 6 of them?
Sure. I don't know. You know, the grey hairs that come with it. I might end up losing my hair.
You know, I used to hire.
You used to hire?
No. Oh, jeez.
I mean, I've actually, a friend of mine asked me the other day. He says, "How many vehicles would you like?" And I said to him 3, and that was 4 months ago. Okay, I've now got 5.
Yeah.
But in all honesty, I don't want to lose that personal touch because I really enjoy meeting and interacting with people, and also people are flying from all over the world to come and use this vehicle, and it's their main means to get to their dream destination. And I want to make sure that this vehicle and this sort of way of getting there is in top condition and there's no surprises and it meets all the expectations, because I would hate to fly 18, 20 plus hours to a destination and be miserable driving a horrible little car, you know?
And a lot of these bigger companies, I think all of them try really hard, but you don't always know what you're going to get.
Yeah.
So one of the things about your trucks that's very cool is that there's a logo on the door. Now, all of your hire vehicles are Toyotas, but because you love Land Rovers, there's actually a modern Defender on the Overlanding with Bruce logo on the side of the door. So that's our segue into talking about modern Defenders. And I know that you have owned a lot of different Defenders, classic Defenders and everything else, and you and I could spend days reminiscing about our love for the brand, but I am really interested to talk to you about your experience with modern Defenders, because I do find that, well, for example, my classic Defender has never failed to start. It's never had an issue. You know, I use Land Cruisers for work, and I personally love Land Rovers, and I drive them a lot. And I've never had an issue with a Land Rover. It's never left me stranded. I think a lot of the reliability issues, it's not that they're unfounded, it's just that they don't necessarily correlate to a ruined trip. I think that people have issues with Land Rovers. I think that the air suspension, if it's not kept in good condition, can really give you some trouble. But usually it's something fairly minor, or it's something electronic. But the modern Defender has actually developed quite a good reputation for reliability. I think Land Rover's come a long way. So what inspired you to say, all right, I'm going to stop driving these classic Defenders and I'm going to buy this newfangled machine? What brought you to that?
I think I turned 50 and I grew up finally. No. I think, I think the world's changed.
Yeah.
I know certainly in my lifetime I've seen a lot of changes in the places that we travel to. Places where it used to take us 2 days to get to, you can get to in a day now, because the roads have improved so much. And you don't need to be uncomfortable. And my father's got a saying that he always says, and he says, any fool can be uncomfortable in the bush.
Yeah.
And I've been driving air suspension vehicles with the Discovery 4 and 5. I tried the Discovery 5 for a short while just before COVID, and then I really liked it. There was nothing wrong with it as far as I'm concerned. But I also had the 3, and I didn't ever have some problems with suspension, with the air suspension. So I think a lot of the problems are brought on by people that don't know how to use it. So, for example, I had a friend that complained that his air suspension kept overheating, and it was actually the pump that overheated.
Yes, and that's common, yeah.
And what people don't realize is that the vehicle raises up into off-road mode when you press the button, but it drops down at 55 kilometers an hour.
Right.
And what people were doing is they're driving on the roads, and the road conditions got better, so they sped up and the vehicle would drop. Then they would have to slow down, the vehicle would raise, and they'll do this the whole day, and eventually this pump would overheat. It's exactly like your tire pump, how hot it gets. And it would protect itself and go into like a limp mode, and So that's actually not a vehicle problem, that's a user problem as far as I'm concerned. And then I also know...
and there's some, not to interrupt, I'm sorry to interrupt the school of thought, but for those that are listening, to help them through that issue, one of the best things you can do in that case is there's these little, they're called a Johnson rod, or there's some other things that you can do, and raise the vehicle in all modes slightly.
Yeah.
Because then when you're in normal mode, it's what used to be off-road 1 or whatever, and then the pump isn't running so much.
Absolutely, yeah. So, I also find that there's very seldom where you need to be at off-road height at 70 k's an hour, because if you're doing 70 k's an hour, the road is good condition.
Yeah.
What's that, 40 miles an hour?
Usually it's sand tracks, where you got a little bit of a higher center hump.
But generally on those sort of tracks, I wouldn't be doing 40, 50 miles an hour, because you catch a corner wrong, you're going to roll the car, or you've got a good chance with a load on the roof.
So, or you hit a G out or something like that.
Absolutely, yeah. So generally I find that the air suspension, then you take the new Defender, it's got something like 85 or 86 ECUs, and people say, if one of those fail, the car's going to come to a stop. But they don't realize that there's a lot of mundane tasks that ECUs do, like control the radio, or control the heating,
HVAC,
or control the electric window and that sort of thing. But there's also some important things. But what Land Rover has done, and what gave me a lot of confidence in the vehicle, is that they built in redundancy into the ECUs. So they've got up to 5 backup units, and ECUs that can adapt and back up the important ECUs to keep the vehicle going. It's also, after many years of driving these vehicles, the only vehicle that I've had warn me that the battery's low.
Oh, sure.
So it's got a really silly feature that when you open up one of the doors, the dashboard all comes on. But if you're camping for a weekend or a few days and you keep opening the doors, this is coming on, it's using your battery power, so your battery drains. And what happens is it actually makes this noise, it pongs, and it tells you battery low, please start vehicle. And I've never had a warning. And I've never had that in a vehicle. So there's a lot of silly little things, like the dash coming on when you open a door, but you can overcome that by leaving the door slightly ajar, not catching it. So you actually, then the system shuts down and it doesn't flatten the battery.
That makes sense.
So there's ways around everything.
If I understand, so you had a Discovery 5, and I'm going to pull in some of the conversation that I had with Kingsley Holgate too. Okay. So he had a Discovery 5 that he took to the easternmost point of Africa, which is in Somalia, on the Horn, literally the Horn of Africa, and he had to use a private military escort or private security escort to get there without getting kidnapped or shot. So guys with guns, and he drove these cars 70, 80,000 kilometers, drove them essentially around Africa and never had a failure. And he's currently he's at 40,000 kilometers on the modern Defender, going to, through Chad, through. He went through South Sudan. The places that he's taking these cars, and the only thing that he had go wrong was a battery died.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that's happened to these cars. And when he told me that, it just made me realize, I think that a lot of this anxiety that people have around Defenders, I think it comes from either a lack of mechanical knowledge themselves, or from just a genuine fear in the possibility that something might go wrong, which I think is valid. I think it's valid to assume that Land Rovers are complex, they are less reliable than a Land Cruiser, so there is certainly a greater probability that something will go wrong, but statistically, it really doesn't.
Yeah. Well, I think that Land Rover, and I've got no affiliation with Land Rover, but Land Rover the Land Rover have progressed a lot. In the 90s, they went through a bad spell with the Discovery 2 and that sort of thing.
For sure.
And the TV5 motor, and they went through this bad spell, and I think that sort of gave them a bad reputation, and people haven't forgiven them for that.
Yeah.
And that reputation stuck with them. But there's a lot of good things that they've done on the new Defender, like, for example, all the electrical connectors. I forget the rating, but they are rated to be underwater 2 meters underwater.
IP67.
IP60, that's it, something like that. Which I don't think many other vehicles in the market, including the Land Cruiser, have.
I'm not sure. I wouldn't want to speak to that. But I know that the Land Rover definitely does. And it's the sealing of the doors and the amount of weather and water sealing that they have that allows them to achieve such deep water ratings. And if I'm not mistaken, now I've been in some terrifyingly deep water in a modern Defender when I did the trip through Namibia with them, and I'll post some photos in this episode, but it was up over the bonnet, but I know you've done that recently too.
Yes, yeah.
So talk about how deep was this water that you took the Defender?
Okay, first of all, I don't condone deep water crossings. They're quite
unsafe.
My rule in overlanding is nothing higher than the top of the wheel. And I try and stick to that rule. But what had happened is my wife and I had crossed this little river crossing, and we had got into a section in Maremi where we were game viewing, and the river had risen. And when we wanted to come back, it was over waist deep. Okay, and I had to, go and walk the water crossing as you do, but you got to be careful because there's crocodiles.
There are, yeah.
There's big crocodiles. So I took a spade for protection, false protection. But it did make me feel better, but it wasn't the wisest thing to do, but it was better than driving a car. And I eventually found a shorter crossing, but it was a deeper section for about 2 meters. And I weighed up the other sections. They seemed a little bit looser, but they were longer crossings. And I thought, well, I've got more chance of getting through the shorter one, even if I just get the nose out and I get stuck without the nose.
Yeah, sure. And you can winch from
there.
Yeah,
exactly. And there was a tree had fallen down on the other side, so it would have been a good winching point. And after some assessing, I decided to take this water crossing. And I got my wife to film it, fortunately. I thought, let's make it good.
Yeah, sure.
And the water actually came up on the windscreen. And the only thing that was wrong with the car afterwards is that one of the mud flaps had come loose.
Yeah.
Okay, there was nothing else. I mean, I actually, afterwards I was a little bit angry with myself, but we didn't have a choice for doing a water crossing that deep. But the only problem I had afterwards is that one of the mud flaps had just unclipped. I clipped it back and it was fine.
Yeah.
And in all honesty, I think that clip had broken previously because I haven't had that happen to me since on any water crossing. There was no water that came in the doors. There was no lights. There was no ill effects at all. I checked the filter. The filter was totally dry.
And do you have a snorkel on yours?
Yeah, I have a snorkel on mine.
So raised air intake?
Raised air intake. Yeah, you get in trouble for saying snorkel.
Yeah, exactly.
I found that out. But no water got in where it had, and the engine compartment was surprisingly clean and dry. So water hadn't even got in. And the Defenders have a really great feature when you put it into wading mode. People say, well, what's it going to happen?
Yeah.
When you put it in wading mode, it's got these flaps that close down in front of the radiator. And when you're crossing rivers, there's a lot of stuff floating in the river that can block up radiators. So these flaps close and actually protect the radiator.
And it shuts down the fan too.
And it shuts down the fan. In the old days, we used to take a piece of tarp and put it over the front. Now these new Defenders Defenders, you don't have to do that, you know.
So what model Defender is this that you have now?
Right now I've got the D300. It's an HSE.
So it's a diesel.
The diesel 3 litre, yeah. And it's incredible. It's sort of, on a trip when it's fully loaded, I run at about 10 litres per 100, 10, 11 litres per 100.
That's really good.
Which is really good. I'm not sure how to convert that to gallons.
Just good. It's good.
Okay.
Yeah. There's very few four-wheel drives in the U.S. that get that kind of economy.
Yeah. So and it's a really comfortable sort of, and it's got a lot of power. You know, there's a lot of times where you've got narrow roads and you follow these trucks through Africa, you know, and it comes to a very short overtaking place, and you need a lot of acceleration to get. My old Defenders used to sit behind the trucks for days.
Yeah.
With these new ones, you've actually got enough power that you can quickly overtake safely, you know, and not put yourself at risk.
And what I notice about them too is that it for a stock vehicle, it has one of the finest ride qualities, even better than a Range Rover.
Yeah.
It just off-road. It has one of the best ride qualities of any four-wheel drive.
Yeah, absolutely.
That air suspension is you get to camp after 10 hours of driving on tracks, and you're not that tired.
No. You actually look forward to driving, you know, and the air conditioner works, not like the old ones.
Yeah.
The old ones used to cool your knees. You know?
I've got that, yeah.
So they cool
My
your
knees are freezing.
Yeah, and the rest of you are like sweating and everything.
Totally.
So, you know, you've got a nice climate-controlled, quiet environment. If you've got stuff on the roof, there's going to be a bit of wind noise, but generally that's it. There's no rattles. The vehicle is actually too quiet sometimes because you have a bunch of keys in your cubbyhole, and then you hear the one key clicking against the other, and you say, what's rattling? And that's mean, you know.
Yeah, there are some things that you can feel a little isolated because it is so quiet, and the suspension is so well dampened, and then the steering feels a little artificial because of how it's designed with the electric pumps and everything. So those are some things that you feel a little disconnected from the experience, but over a long journey, it's that reduction in driver fatigue that I think gives you a better experience, and your family shows up happier and less frustrated and everything else like that. So you've really it sounds like you've had a problem with a low battery and a mud flap.
That's it.
And that's it.
I had a cracked windscreen, but that was a truck that threw a rock.
Yeah, but that can happen to anything.
That can happen to any vehicle.
And then you had another Defender before that, and did you have any issues with that one?
So what actually happened is that with my new Discovery, or the Discovery 5, I wanted to sell it and get the new Defender in 2020, and then COVID happened.
Yeah.
And I'd sold the Discovery, but the new Defender hadn't arrived, and you know, at that time we didn't know if the world was coming to an end. So,
of course.
So, you know, this big thing called COVID was happening. So I phoned Yaku, shame, the late Yaku, who's passed away now, may he rest in peace. I phoned him up and I said, listen, would you mind if I cancel? I know you've sold my other vehicle, but I'm a little bit concerned about this COVID thing, you know, that's happening. So my vehicle was actually given to somebody else that I had ordered, and I cancelled it. And then probably about 6 or 8 months later, I thought, well, we got one life anyway. Whatever's going to happen in the world.
Isn't that a Land Rover thing? One life, live it.
Yeah, exactly. And then I phoned up Yaku and I said, you know, have you got another vehicle? And they had a demo model, pretty much exactly the same as I'd ordered, and I bought that. It was a D240, so it was the 200 horsepower, I think, diesel motor. And it was great. I mean, I traveled.
Is that the one that you can fit the 18-inch wheel on?
Yes. Yeah. I actually imported some 18-inch wheels. A company in the UK makes compromoted wheels.
Yeah, those are nice.
Yeah. And I traveled most of Southern Africa like that.
And any issues with that vehicle?
Not at all. I'm just trying to think. You know, same battery warnings, but apart from that, no issues.
Yeah.
And I've got dual battery systems, and I actually stole some ideas from some of the Aussie guys, and I made a little drawer system with a table in the back of the fridge and everything. So it's everything I need in a vehicle, you know. And
so with this new one, you're just happier with the power plant.
Yeah.
Because it's a very, they're so similar other than the engine.
Yeah, you know, when you're driving the D240 at 100 kilometers an hour fully loaded, maybe towing, something like that, you feel like you're driving it a little bit hard.
Yeah.
With the D300, you don't even feel like you're driving.
I do remember
so
that.
much power.
When we drove the Defenders in Namibia, it was actually just before COVID. You know, I left just as COVID was kicking off.
Okay.
But we went and did Wenzel's Pass and a lot of dirt roads, and I intentionally kept trying to drive the diesel because I wanted to get a sense for the rest of the world vehicle. And it wasn't a powerhouse, that's for sure. It was to me, it was more than adequate. I mean, I drive a 300 TDI Classic Defender, so it feels a lot more than that. It felt like a rocket ship compared to that. But no, I mean, I think that overall, most people that are having little errors come up, they usually clear on a key cycle. I just haven't seen people have a lot of issues with it. But again, I also don't want to misrepresent the fact that there is a greater likelihood that something would happen with a Land Rover, but it's certainly not the fire, brimstone, and doom and gloom.
Touch wood, I haven't had any issues, and I think that I would like people to also realize that you always hear and read about negative things that happen. You never read about the positive. Yeah. And I think that in the first year, if I remember the figures correctly, in 2016, when they stopped production of the old Defender, I think they sold 12,000, and they'd averaged at about 16,000. Excuse me, there's a fly flying
That's
around.
Okay.
I think they'd averaged at about 16,000 per year for the last 10 years or something like that. When the new Defender came out in 2020, which was COVID year, they sold 64,000, if I remember correctly, in their first year.
They've become incredibly popular.
Yeah. So, with those kind of sales figures, if you're reading 20, 50 complaints on the internet, it's actually not really a lot if you take a picture of what's been sold out there.
The volume that's been sold.
I mean, locally, we've got a new Defender WhatsApp group where we sort of stay in contact and we sort of give each other hints and help each other out and, share sort of advice and that sort of thing. And there's been a couple of minor issues, but in all honesty, I don't think anyone's been left where they need to tow their vehicle.
Yeah.
The one guy did have a coolant leak, and as a safety precaution, they towed the vehicle, but he didn't have to tow the vehicle.
Yeah, he could have just kept topping it up.
Yeah. He actually arranged for the vehicle to be towed, well, Land Rover arranged for him to have the vehicle towed, just in case. But if that happened in deep, dark Africa where there's no civilization around, he could have actually driven it and every few kilometers checked the water level.
Yeah. Well, that makes me think of, again, like what Kingsley has done, hundreds of thousands of kilometers in these modern Land Rovers, Disco 5, new Defender, and they've just not had any issues. It's pretty incredible. So, what do you think of the 130, by the way? I'm curious.
I'm itching for one.
I think it's my favorite.
Yeah.
I now have come, and it's so unfortunate because the 110 is so magical, but I'm like, either it's got to be a 130 or it's got to be a 90. It's like somehow I've abandoned the 110.
My problem is that I've done a lot of mileage with that 110, and it's kind of like cheating on my wife almost if I don't buy a 130. For a different model or a better looking model or something like that. It's still something I would probably consider. I think if I had,
I like this. I like the way that it looks, and I like that little bit of extra space. Because I like to sleep inside the cars, so for me it would be just right.
So for me, if money wasn't a question and I could pretty much build my dream overland vehicle, it would be a 130 with a pop-up roof.
Okay. Who's doing that?
I don't think anyone's doing that.
So you'd figure it out. You'd make a plan.
Yeah. I'd buy one with a sunroof, take the sunroof out, and there's the whole ticket to the top,
go. How cool.
But obviously you need to have quite a big budget for something like that.
Yeah, sure.
But it would be an amazing vehicle, I think.
And then what else do you find or do you recommend or what are the modifications that you've done to your Defender 110?
Okay, so the only modifications is I changed my tires. I put BF Goodrich all-terrain tires on it because they got a slightly tougher sidewall. And I also like the aggressive tread pattern on them. I've put an auxiliary or dual battery system in it.
Where is the battery stored?
The battery's stored under the back floor.
Okay, got it.
So if you've got the diesel or the petrol Defender, you lift up the rear floorboard, there's a lot of space under there for tools and a spare battery. So my battery's in there. And it's a simple.
And do you use a lithium or?
No, I use a normal deep cycle battery.
Yeah, sure.
Lithium probably would be better. It's lighter, but they're about 3-4 times the price here in South Africa.
Yeah.
And the old system still works perfectly fine for me.
Sure.
So I don't know if it's really worth spending that kind of money on the new lithium, although it's a very good system. And then I use the National Luna DC to DC dual battery system.
Sure.
And I've been using National Luna. I mean, I've
Incredible
got no affiliation with them. I use their fridges and their dual battery systems and lights.
Yeah,
I've been using them for 20 years and I haven't had an issue.
Yeah.
I had
Their fridges run forever.
Yeah, I had one issue with the fridge. We came back from Cuba Island and I noticed this white sticky stuff in the bottom of the fridge, and I thought maybe it was milk or something had spilt. So I cleaned it up, and I always leave my fridge open after a trip so they don't smell inside. And a few days later I went back and there's some more there, and I cleaned it and it came up again. So eventually I phoned National Luna, and this is what blew my mind away. At that time the fridge was about 3 years old, and I said to them, listen, I've got this happening with the fridge and I'm not quite sure. Maybe it's gas leaking. I know nothing about fridges, And so the guy that I spoke to, he said, well, please bring the fridge in. And I got there and he looked at it with big eyes. He says, I've got to keep this fridge. And I said, well, you can't keep it. It's my fridge. He says, and he gave me a brand new fridge. And what they did is they cut it open, and I think there's a foam inside that hadn't cured properly, and that was leaking through.
Got it.
But after 3 years of ownership, my fridges are well looked after. He replaced it with a brand new one.
Incredible.
That was the only time I've ever had an issue with a National Luna product, and I've been a loyal customer of theirs since then.
Yeah, they're made in South Africa. They have a proper engineering team. They're DC to DC. They have solar inputs, and they're really, it's all quite good, really
Absolutely,
good.
Yeah.
So you've got National Luna fridge, dual battery system, AGM style battery. Do you have a drawer system in the back?
I've got a drawer system. It's a single drawer, because normally when I just go with the vehicle, it's me alone. I'm lucky. I travel a lot for business, so I do a lot of trips on my own. Unlucky, I don't know what you call it. But it's a very basic system that I keep my kitchen stuff in, some food supplies, some luxuries like cool drinks and stuff like that. And then next to it, it's got a fridge that slides out with a table underneath the fridge that slides out.
Yeah.
So very basic system. And then I've put a bigger light on the back, which works off the auxiliary battery. So you don't flatten the main battery in the Defender.
Sure.
And then apart from a couple of OEM accessories, that's it. I mean, I've put an easy-on roof rack on it. I had the OEM roof rack, but it's got plastic end bits, and the slats are quite far apart. So it's very difficult to put wood on top there and everything.
Sure.
So I tested out an easy-on rack, and I just haven't gone back since. It's
I like how their slats go forward and back, because so you can actually sleep on it pretty easily too.
And I'm a big heavy guy. And when I walk up there, it doesn't flex and it doesn't feel like it's going to break. And I came up with this thing. I was joking with a friend the other day. I said, if you want to test the roof rack, if it's right for you, take a piece of wood like you would buy on the side of the road and just throw it on the roof rack. If it damages your roof, you've got the wrong roof rack. And with the rack I've got now, that easy one rack, you can't damage the roof,
So those are pretty minimal modifications.
Yeah.
I do think that it speaks to the capability of the Defender. It is it's not a rock crawler. You can't compare it to a Jeep Rubicon or something like that. But for most travel backcountry roads, it's perfect. It's just gotten more, like, again, Venzel's Pass, it felt like I could have put cruise control on.
Yeah.
It was just really effortless. The vehicle had such an easy time of it. Tell me about what was your most ambitious trip that you've done with one of these Defenders?
Sure. I wouldn't say ambitious, but I've done a lot of trips where I've done a lot of solo traveling through Zimbabwe, where I went to the most northerly point, and then I traveled through the Zambezi Valley on sort of back in the 70s when Rhodesia at that time was at war. They had this track that sort of went to the whole of the Zambezi Valley that they did patrols on. So I drove that entire track, and what's very interesting about that is there's places where you can go see fossilized dinosaur footprints and stuff like that, which is incredible.
Incredible.
And no one knows about it. I actually covered them a little bit on my YouTube channel.
Sure.
Not to advertise my YouTube channel,
No,
but
we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah, for sure.
Please don't expect it to be professional, because it's probably the least professional channel.
Oh, I think your stuff is great. Your stuff is very authentic and genuine.
So I've done a lot of trips like that. I went to the Eastern Highlands in Zimbabwe, which was amazing also. I mean, you've got these massive waterfalls with these pools at the bottom where you can go and swim, and it's crystal clear water, and you can camp right next to them. There's no one there.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're lucky in Southern Africa. You've got all these different sort of types of areas that you can go to, and you can pretty much go to them within a day or two. You can go from the hottest desert to the coldest mountaintop within a matter of hours in some cases, you know.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
So,
how do people find out about your hire company? How do they find you on that?
so pretty much everywhere it's Overlanding with Bruce. I have a website where it's still very new.
Is it overlandingwithbruce.com?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's still very new. It's only about 4 or 5 months old. So the plan is that when I get more customers and I get more pictures, I'll share more pictures of their trips there.
Sure.
You know, without invading on people's privacy.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
So that people can sort of see what to expect. And what I've done, the YouTube channel, I never really started to try and start a business. The business came from the YouTube channel, if that makes
Sure.
sense.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm going to try and do more of experience type videos where I show you what you can expect by going to a certain area.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense.
And hopefully we can provide a really nice solution for people to come and live out their dreams, you know,
Yeah.
their dream trips. Yeah.
Well, you're doing it. I mean, you
thank
help me achieve a dream of spending. I have met Kingsley Holgate before, but you helped to support me going to the Africa House, his home on the Indian Ocean, and spend a couple days with him and his lovely wife Sheila, and do an interview with Kingsley. So thank you for making that possible.
No, you're very welcome.
On Instagram, you're Overlanding with Bruce.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, and then your YouTube channel is
Yeah.
the same.
And Facebook.
All right, so
Yeah.
that people can find it. If you were to give a couple pieces of advice, maybe you pick your 20-year-old self, maybe you pick a brand new Overlander. What are a couple things that you tell them?
Sure. If I was 20 years old now, I wouldn't be so responsible. To be
Take more
honest,
risk, maybe?
I would take more risk. You know, I grew up in a very traditional way, so there was expectations. Not that they were enforced on me, it's just kind of, I grew up like that, so I kind of expected when I was 20 I needed to go to the army in South Africa, which was, we had to at that time. And then, you know, after that find a job and then start a life, you know.
Yeah.
And I think if I had to be 20 years old, I certainly do this and say this to my daughters, as I say, take more risk and go for more adventures. And everything works out in the end.
It
You know,
does.
don't worry about that paycheck. Just go out there and have fun and experience all these beautiful places. I mean, I went to Thailand, took my family to Thailand 4 years ago for the first time, and it blew their minds, you know. And I would highly recommend that 20-year-olds put a backpack on and just hit the road, you know. Go and
You're going to
explore.
learn a lot about yourself. You're going to
Yeah.
learn a lot about the world.
Yeah.
It'll change your perceptions of the world. It'll show you that you don't need all the fancy things. You don't need
Absolutely.
expensive stuff to be happy. We need experiences. We need time spent with the people that we love, the people that we care about. Well, that's great advice,
Yeah.
Bruce. Thank
Yeah.
you.
No, you're
I
welcome.
appreciate
Thank
it. And thank you so much for spending the time on the podcast today.
No,
Thank
it's
you
my
for
honor. Thank
you for being an advocate for modern Land Rovers. I think that we're going to see more and more of them being used, and we are already starting to see more and more of them being used, because the boogeyman isn't quite what people thought it was
Yeah.
going to be. So.
But I would like to ask that if anyone does have problems, please don't contact me and blame me for it. But I can only speak from my experience.
Exactly. Well, thank you again,
Yeah.
Bruce. And we thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.